Lines Written in the Days of Growing Darkness by Mary Oliver. Every year we have been witness to it, how the world descends into a rich mash in order that it may resume. And therefore, who would cry out to the petals on the ground to stay, knowing as we must how the vivacity of what was is married to the vitality of what will be? I don't say it's easy, but what else will do if the love one claims to have for the world be true? So let us go on, cheerfully enough, this and every crisping day, though the sun be swinging east, and the ponds be cold and black, and the sweets of the year be doomed. Wings by Mary Oliver. I saw the heron poise like a branch of white petals in the swamp, in the mud that lies like a glaze, in the water that swirls its pale panels of reflected clouds. I saw the heron shaking its damp wings, and then I felt an explosion, a pain, also a happiness I can hardly mention, as I slid free, as I saw the world through those yellow eyes, as I stood like that, rippling under the mottled sky of the evening that was beginning to throw its dense shadows. No, said my heart, and drew back, but my bones knew something wonderful about the darkness, and they thrashed in their cords, they fought, they wanted to lie down in that silky mash of the swamp, the sooner to fly. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak during your All Hallowtide service today. Since I come before you as a naturalist, I thought it might be helpful to share one definition of that word. Naturalists are people who seek to observe the interconnected relationships between living and non-living beings so we can understand the past, present, and future of our local and cosmological environments. It is within this framework that I think about death, resurrection, and everlasting life. Crafting this presentation was an immensely joyful process for me, inspired by the ways that poet Mary Oliver expresses the connections that I study. My tall and lanky Uncle Roland was one of the first people in my life to die. He is reincarnated in Thailand. I'll explain. Roland's wife, Nancy, was an anthropologist, and they spent a lot of time together in a certain village doing research while I was very young. Not long after they returned home, Roland's heart burst due to a genetic condition that had recently taken my Grandma Ginny as well. When the leader of the village learned about Roland's death, he told our family that there were signs surrounding the birth of a baby boy that indicated he is Roland's reincarnation. And as the child grew, he became unusually tall. This was my first encounter with reincarnation. For the longest time, these were my only close encounters with death. Then, when I was about to start graduate school, my dear Aunt Nan, Roland's older sister, finally lost her battle with cancer. Nan and I were close. You would have liked her. She was part of the UU community in Belfast, Maine. She also attended Quaker meetings and witch camp. She had a Buddhist shrine in her home, and whenever she saw something beautiful, a sunset, a flower, or a cloud, she exclaimed, "Thank you, goddess!" By the time Nan died, I had Mary Oliver in my life to help me put things into perspective. The poem that was read earlier, called Wings, became a touchstone for me. I'll say those last lines for you again. My bones knew something wonderful about the darkness, and they thrashed in their cords, they fought. They wanted to lie down in that silky mash of the swamp, the sooner to fly. Poems are often metaphors filled with symbolism, but as a naturalist, I recognize the truth in this poem. Swamps are cradles of both decomposition and of new life. If Nan, I, or anyone were to lie down in that silky mash of the swamp, Efficient teams of bacteria would dismantle our bodies bit by bit back into their component parts: calcium, phosphorus, carbon, oxygen, and many more. Then algae hungrily absorb the phosphorus. Zooplankton take calcium out of the water to form their shells, while they crunch on the algae. Small fish eat the zooplankton. Big fish eat small fish, all the while passing atoms from our bodies and energy from the sun up the food chain. The vivacity of what was is married to the vitality of what will be, wrote Mary Oliver. Finally, with a stealthy strike and powerful gulp, a heron will eat the big fish. When those powerful wings rise into the sky, atoms who were once part of our bodies rise too. Of course, if you ask Nan, the wings that carry her skyward belong to a dragonfly. Nan told us that she would come back as a dragonfly, or rather, as all dragonflies. As a result, we see her and feel her presence often. On a mountain, in my garden, here on the Chequamegon River. When I see a dragonfly, I give her a little smile. Sometimes I say aloud, "Hi, Nan." She's even on the cover of my book, which just happened to arrive from the printers on Nan's birthday. Nan's atoms may literally be part of a dragonfly somewhere, but by giving us this touchstone, she ensured that she'd be present in our hearts and our minds as well. This concept is well stated by the Greek philosopher Pericles, whose quote is in the sympathy cards I always keep on hand. He said, "What you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but what is woven into the lives of others." This strikes a deep chord with me. Naturalists are often teachers, protectors of landscapes, and planters of flowers and trees. All of those actions have impacts far into the future. We live on as long as our actions ripple out into the world. Roland is still there in his village, living in the culture he once studied. Nan is zooming around beautiful places, being grateful for their beauty. They are both here with us today. On the other hand, their father, my Grandpa Warren, a stoic Methodist farmer, is most definitely in a Hawaii-like heaven, having donuts at coffee time and taking a nap after lunch. But let's get back to the natural history of reincarnation. In her poem, Pink Moon, the Pond, Mary Oliver writes, "And that's when you know you will live whether you will or not, one way or another, because everything is everything else. One long muscle." It's not always wing muscles that carry the atoms of fish into the sky. Spawning salmon convey an incredible story of transformation and renewal. From their nests among the stones of rivers and streams, young salmon swim out to the ocean and water filled also with leaf litter, soil, and other parts of the upland ecosystems. After spending years at sea, adult salmon have built their bodies with nutrients gathered from the open ocean. Following their noses, they seek the unique essences of the river they were born in, the potion of particles who shared their childhood journey. Swimming against the gradient, salmon bring those nutrients back home. This is important. Salmon die along every part of their journey toward reproduction. Bears, wolves, otters, eagles, ravens, crows, gulls, and even insects eat their fill. Those scavengers are, as Mary Oliver writes, looking for death, to eat it, to make it vanish, to make of it the miracle, resurrection. In their bellies, bowels, and beings, they carry salmon nutrients into the woods. Bacteria finish off the scraps. The soil is nourished. Trees on the banks of salmon-filled rivers grow 3 times faster than their cousins who grow near rivers who are devoid of salmon. Nitrogen from the ocean rises through trunks and tickles the sky. Twisted roots and fallen logs create deep pools, which stay cool in the shade of the canopy and provide safe haven for the next generation of salmon. A steady rain of leaves and other organic matter feeds invertebrates on the river bottom, which in turn feed the salmon fry. It could feel sad that salmon heading upstream to spawn are also swimming headlong toward their deaths. But in the end, or is it the beginning, salmon become trees, and trees become new salmon. They cannot do this without each other. Once you think like a naturalist and see the connections between past, present, and future, the story bursts at the seams with joyful reciprocity. Mary Oliver writes, "But these are the woods you love, where the secret name of every death is life again, a miracle brought surely not of mere turning, but of dense and scalding reenactment." Yes, this story is reenacted over and over in nature. There can be no creation without destruction. The actions often seem very small. The impact is truly enormous. Let's come back a little closer to home, to a sugar maple forest. This time of year, I like to say that the sun shines up from the ground. Those golden leaves really are made of sunshine, with energy captured over a few months of growth and locked inside molecules of sugar by the process of photosynthesis. Leaves aren't just made of sunshine, though. Deep in the ground, the tree's roots and their partners, the fungi, mined minerals from little grains of sand. Calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus were unlocked, transported upward, and used for growth. When maple trees shed their leaves, they are essentially providing compost to the smaller plants at their feet. The minerals, once unreachable to most, and the carbon captured out of thin air enrich the soil. Just like in your garden, the annual event of death provides the building blocks of new life. In a maple forest, death has many implications for the next generation. The shin-high seedlings who carpet the forest floor might be as many as 40 years old. In the shade of their grandmothers, they are waiting their turn. When wind and decay send a huge canopy crashing to the ground, light streams in. Those tiny seedlings race upward to claim their prize. The death of the elder clears the way for new life. This is the dominant form of disturbance and renewal in a sugar maple forest. One by one, old trees topple into a writhing mess of bugs and fungi and moss, and new trees rise toward the sun. Mary Oliver wrote this poem about an owl, but I bet these lines resonate with the maples, too. Maybe death isn't darkness after all, but so much light wrapping itself around us. Now, I'm going to pause here for an aside, because not all of our losses can be comforted by imagining the atoms of our loved ones dispersing into the world. For all my joy, I'm not here to diminish your pain, and neither is Mary Oliver. This is her poem. The oak tree at the entrance to Blackwater Pond. Every day on my way to the pond, I pass the lightning-felled, chesty, 100-fingered black oak, which, summers ago, swam forward when the storm laid one lean yellow wand against it, smoking it open to its rosy heart. It dropped down in a veil of rain, in a cloud of sap and fire, and became what it has been ever since, a black boat floating in the tossing leaves of summer, like the coffin of Osiris descending upon the cloudy Nile. But listen, I'm tired of that brazen promise, death and resurrection. I'm tired of hearing how the nitrogens will return to the earth again through the hinterland of patience, how the mushrooms and the yeasts will arrive in the wind, how they'll anchor the pearls of their bodies and begin to gnaw through the darkness like wolves at bones. What I loved, I mean, was that tree. Tree of the moment, tree of my own sad mortal heart, and I don't want to sing any more of the way Osiris came home at last on a clean and powerful ship over the dangerous sea as a tall and beautiful stranger. Let's pause for a moment to acknowledge those trees of the moment, those trees of our own sad mortal hearts, those particular assemblages of atoms who are just not the same when divvied up into other lives. You may have noticed that many of my thoughts about death center on the cycles of matter and the flow of energy in our ecosystems. Atoms and light, atoms and life. These things come together brilliantly when we talk about supernovas. I was never an astronaut aspiring space kid, but I did become enthralled with stars once I learned that they, like us, are born and die. Stars arise from clouds of dust, where gravity brings the particles together. Mass builds and gravity increases in a positive feedback loop until the pressure is so great that hydrogen atoms smashing into each other combine to form helium. Nuclear fusion begins, light shines, and a star is born. As the star ages and becomes a red giant, helium fuses into carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, magnesium, and eventually iron. These elements are common here on Earth and common in our bodies. But where does the rest of the periodic table come in? Those elements can't be created during a star's life. They are conceived during its death. The iron core of a big old star collapses in on itself and then blasts outward in a supernova explosion. The heat and energy involved in this conflagration are enough to synthesize many more elements, which are all hurled into space to form a supernova remnant, also called a nebula, the birthplace of stars, and also the birthplace of planets like Earth. The atoms who coalesce to form the Earth now cycle endlessly through her rocks, her air, her water, and her life. We are literally made of stardust. Before scientists even understood nuclear fusion, John Muir wrote, "When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe." I believe that web of connections, both physical and social, is our chance for immortality. When I think about those atoms rising from the mud and soaring away in the wings of a heron, when I think about becoming part of that one long muscle, when I hear the phrase dense and scalding reenactment, I become almost eager for my body to melt away into the leaves. One of my favorite Mary Oliver poems is Sleeping in the Forest. It begins, "I thought the earth remembered me. She took me back so tenderly." And it ends, "All night I rose and fell as if water, grappling with luminous doom. By morning I had vanished at least a dozen times into something better." And if you also feel the elation, the joy at the thought of vanishing into something better, or if that scares you half to death, here's the good news from a naturalist point of view. From a worldview filled with connections and joyful reciprocity, we don't have to wait until we die to experience the miracle of resurrection. It lives within us. Our veins course with stardust. Our muscles are built from salmon. Our lungs converse with maple trees. Our bones swirl through the mud with herons. We don't have to wait to be the hummingbird. It's almost certain that somewhere in a hummingbird's heart There is already an atom of carbon that once entered our lungs. With every breath, with every bite, we are intimately connected with all the atoms on Earth. When we think like naturalists, when we allow ourselves to be woven into the web, then, as Mary Oliver writes, life is real and pain is real, but death is an impostor. May our mortal hearts find joy on this All Hallowtide. Thank you. Long Afternoon at the Edge of Little Sister Pond by Mary Oliver. As for life, I'm humbled. I'm without words sufficient to say how it has been hard as flint and soft as a spring pond, both of these and over, and long pale afternoons besides. And so many mysteries, beautiful as eggs in a nest, still unhatched, though warm and watched over by something I have never seen, a tree angel perhaps, or a ghost of holiness. Every day I walk out into the world to be dazzled, then to be reflective. It suffices. It is all comfort, along with human love, dog love, water love, little serpent love, sunburst love, or love for that smallest of birds flying among the scarlet flowers. There is hardly time to think about stopping and lying down at last to the long afterlife, to the tenderness yet to come, when time will brim over the singular pond and become forever, and we will pretend to melt away into the leaves. As for death, I can't wait to be the hummingbird. Can you?